Ethan Walker stepped off the shuttle and onto the surface of Virex 7, feeling a mixture of awe and trepidation. The planet was unlike anything he had ever seen. Towering spires of shimmering crystal reached high into the sky, and strange plants swayed in the breeze in a rhythm that felt almost too perfect. The air itself seemed alive, filled with an energy that hummed through his skin. As he adjusted to the alien world's gravity, he couldn't help but feel small and insignificant amidst the vast alien landscape. The Zeran people were powerful, advanced beyond humanity in ways that made his own species look almost primitive, yet here he was standing at the cusp of history, tasked with the delicate duty of negotiating peace between the Zerans and a coalition of alien races whose differences were centuries old. It was a monumental task, one that required skill, diplomacy, and a certain level of grace which Ethan feared he lacked. He had been trained for moments like this, but nothing could have prepared him for the sudden moment of surrealism that washed over him as he laid eyes on her. Zera. She was tall, even by Zeran standards, with skin that shimmered like polished obsidian, eyes that glowed with an inner fire, and a presence that could only be described as overwhelming to Ethan. She seemed like the very embodiment of the planet itself, ancient and powerful, yet poised and graceful. She was everything he had imagined about the Zerans, but somehow more striking in person. Her beauty was not something to admire from afar, it was something that commanded attention. Jira's gaze met his, and for a moment time seemed to stretch as though the entire universe had stopped and was waiting for something, for him to say something, anything, but his mind went blank. The weight of the moment threatened to crush him under its intensity, and so he did what any nervous human would do. He spoke without thinking. He stumbled over his words, but his voice came out clear despite his racing heart. "Would you go to dinner with me?" He asked the question before he had even fully processed it. His cheeks flushed in an instant as he realized how ridiculous it must sound. Dinner with a Zeran representative on a foreign world where the stakes of the evening were astronomical, and all he could think of was asking her out like some schoolboy back on Earth. Jira's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction, but the smile that formed on her lips was enough to make Ethan's heart race. It wasn't an encouraging smile, though it wasn't one of rejection either. It was something else, something he couldn't place. The silence between them stretched on for what felt like an eternity. The air around them grew thick with tension until finally she spoke, her voice soft, but with a strength that made every word seem like it had the power to shake the ground beneath them. "You are bold to ask such a question, human," she said, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. "But understand this, in my culture, dinner is not simply a meal. It is a binding act, a promise of something more than just food. It is a decision that will affect more than just the two of us, and there are consequences to every decision we make." Her tone shifted slightly as she continued, "If you wish to accept that, then we may proceed, but know that there will be no turning back." Ethan stood frozen for a moment, trying to comprehend what she had said. His thoughts scrambled for an explanation of what this could mean. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't even thought about the cultural implications of something as simple as asking a woman to dinner. But now it seemed clear that nothing was simple here. Nothing was ever simple with the Zerans. He swallowed hard and nodded almost against his own will, his mouth dry as he forced the words out. I didn't mean to offend you," he stammered, trying to find his footing. "I just wanted to make a connection. I didn't know it was that serious. I didn't know." Jira's smile widened just slightly, but the intensity in her eyes never wavered. "You have not offended me, human," she replied, her voice now tinged with something softer. "But now you must choose how to proceed." With that, she turned and began walking away, her long strides echoing in the quiet of the alien landscape, leaving Ethan standing there unsure of what he had just gotten himself into, but knowing one thing for certain: this dinner would be anything but ordinary. Ethan stood there watching her walk away, his mind spinning as he tried to process what had just happened. Dinner was supposed to be a simple social gesture, wasn't it? Wasn't it supposed to be a way to build bridges, to connect with someone on a basic human level? But here on Virex 7, it seemed as though dinner meant something far deeper, something far more complicated. As he stared at Jira's retreating figure, his mind raced through every possible scenario, trying to piece together what had just transpired and what it all meant. He had heard about the complexities of Zeran culture before, of course, But no one had ever warned him that something as innocuous as asking for dinner could trigger such a response. Was it some kind of test? Had he failed? Or was this all part of a greater ritual that he couldn't even begin to understand? The more he thought about it, the more unsure he became. As he walked back toward his quarters, he felt a gnawing anxiety settle in the pit of his stomach. He had come here to represent humanity, to build peace, and instead he had blundered into some kind of cultural minefield. Back in his room, Ethan paced restlessly back and forth, his thoughts swirling around in a chaotic jumble. He pulled up a holographic map of the planet Virex 7, hoping the familiar image would calm him, but it did nothing to ease the sense of impending doom that weighed on him. Something about Jera's words echoed in his mind, a binding act, a promise of something more than just food. Was that what dinner meant to her? Was it some kind of ancient contract that couldn't be broken? Or was he simply overthinking things? Was he just reading too much into the entire situation? He wished he had the answers, but all he had now were more questions. He sat down at his desk and activated the communicator, connecting to his AI assistant Tessa, who appeared on the screen with her usual calm demeanor. Ethan immediately began speaking in a rush. "Tessa, I need you to pull up everything we know about Sharon customs, about their dining rituals, about what all this means." Tessa's glowing eyes blinked, and she responded in her neutral tone. "Of course, Ambassador Walker. I will gather the information you requested. Please hold." As the screen flickered with data streams and holographic images, Ethan sat back in his chair, his mind still racing. He didn't know what to expect, but he hoped that Tessa could at least offer some guidance. After a few moments, the AI spoke again, her voice cool and clear. "The Zeran people view dinner as a deeply significant event in their society. It is not merely a meal, but an opportunity for profound personal exchange and connection. The act of sharing food with someone can signify various things depending on context, such as a formal alliance, a gesture of peace, a bond of trust, or even the beginning of a conflict." Tessa paused for a moment, as though processing the weight of the information. "It is considered an intimate ritual with far-reaching consequences, and the bond formed during such an event is not easily undone." Ethan let out a breath. He didn't realize he had been holding the information didn't help much, but it certainly added to the gravity of the situation he had unwittingly thrown himself into. As he sat there absorbing the weight of Tessa's words, he felt the stirrings of panic begin to rise again. He had asked for dinner with Jera, not to make a political statement, but to break the tension between them. He had hoped for a simple connection, but now it seemed like he had been walking into a storm without even realizing it. The more Ethan thought about Jera, the more complicated the situation became. She was not just any alien diplomat. She was something much more. Her people had been at war for centuries, their pride and honor tied up in ancient rituals and customs that he couldn't even begin to fathom. And now here he was, a human caught in the middle of it all, unsure of what he had started, unsure of what to do next. Tessa's voice interrupted his thoughts once more. "Ambassador Walker, it appears that Jera is awaiting your response to her invitation to dinner. The event will take place in 2 hours. Please confirm your participation." Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he realized that he had no choice but to move forward. There was no turning back now. He had to go. He had to face whatever this dinner would entail, whether he was ready or not. He couldn't afford to back down now. Not with everything on the line, with the fate of intergalactic peace hanging in the balance. He took a deep breath and typed his response into the communicator, confirming his attendance with a single word. Ethan stood in front of the mirror in his quarters, staring at his reflection as the cold weight of his decision settled over him. He had agreed to go to dinner with Jera. Without truly understanding what that meant or what it might cost him now, he was about to walk into an alien world so different from anything he had known and take part in a ritual that could bind his fate to hers forever. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to calm the racing thoughts in his mind. But nothing helped. His pulse thudded in his ears as the minutes ticked down to the moment he would step into the unknown. He had been briefed about the importance of appearances on Virex 7, about how first impressions could make or break a diplomatic mission, But even with that knowledge, he still felt woefully underprepared for what lay ahead. He was just a man, a human diplomat, out of his depth in a galaxy of ancient species, with cultures far more complex than anything he could ever hope to fully understand. And yet here he was about to face one of the most important moments of his life, with nothing but his instincts and his training to guide him. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts, and the door slid open to reveal a Geran servant waiting outside. She gestured for him to follow. Without speaking, her movements were fluid and graceful like a dancer as she led him down the corridor of the embassy building to the grand hall, where the dinner would take place. Ethan tried to steady his breath as they walked. The towering walls of the hallway were adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to tell stories of ancient battles and lost civilizations. The air smelled faintly of exotic spices and something earthy, something alive. As they reached the entrance to the dining hall, the servant stepped aside and gestured for Ethan to enter. He hesitated for just a moment before stepping inside, and the sight that greeted him took his breath away. The room was vast and bathed in a soft golden light. The floor was covered with soft rugs, made from some kind of shimmering fabric, and in the center of the room was a long table made of translucent stone. Its surface glowed faintly, as if the table itself was alive. Around it were large cushions arranged in a circle for the diners to sit on. Everything about the setting was surreal and unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. At the far end of the room stood Geran. She was a striking figure, as always, her presence commanding the space around her. As she turned to face him, her eyes glowed softly in the dim light, and her expression was unreadable. She was dressed in flowing robes that seemed to shift and change in the light like liquid silver, and her hair cascaded down her back in waves of dark silk. The air between them seemed to hum with anticipation, and Ethan suddenly felt very small and very human in the face of her alien beauty and power. Geran regarded him silently for a moment, her gaze intense and calculating as though measuring him. She then gave a small nod and gestured for him to approach her with a slight but elegant motion of her hand. Ethan's legs felt like lead as he moved toward her, taking a seat on one of the cushions opposite her. His mind raced with questions and uncertainties, but he held his tongue and waited for her to speak. "Welcome, Ambassador Walker." Geran's voice was soft, but carried an authority that made him sit straighter. "You have come to witness the Geran ritual of shared sustenance, and if you are brave enough, you will learn much tonight." Ethan swallowed hard. The weight of her words settled over him like a heavy cloak, but he nodded and replied as steadily as he could, "Thank you for allowing me to partake in this ritual, Geran. I don't know what to expect, but I'm ready to learn." Geran's lips curled slightly at the corners in a gesture that might have been a smile or something else entirely. Her eyes softened just a fraction as she gestured to the glowing dishes that had been set on the table between them. "This is no ordinary meal, Ambassador. This is the beginning of something much deeper. It is a test of courage and of understanding, not just of our cultures, but of each other's souls. What you experience tonight will change you forever, and once we begin, there is no turning back." Ethan's heart skipped a beat at the gravity of her words, but he steadied himself and nodded again, not trusting his voice to speak. He wasn't sure what kind of test he was about to undergo, but whatever it was, he couldn't back out now. He had come too far. He had chosen to face this, and now he had to see it through. Geran's eyes locked with his, and for a moment, it felt as if the room itself faded away, leaving only the two of them, connected by something invisible, something much older and much more powerful than either of them could comprehend. Ethan sat across from Geran, his mind still reeling from the weight of her words. The tension in the room was palpable, and the soft glow of the table only seemed to heighten the surreal atmosphere around them. The dishes between them were unlike anything he had ever seen. The food was strange, not just in appearance, but in the way it seemed to pulse with life, as if it had a rhythm of its own, a heartbeat that matched the thrum of his own pulse. He could feel his palms sweating as he hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Geran's gaze never left him, her eyes glowing softly in the dim light, and Ethan could feel the weight of her unspoken expectations pressing down on him. He knew that in this moment everything he said and would matter. Every gesture, every word, every breath would carry the weight of something far greater than a simple meal, far greater than just a diplomatic exchange. He had stepped into something ancient, something far beyond what he could have prepared for, but now there was no turning back. Without a word, Gerard gestured toward the first dish placed before him. It was a delicate bowl filled with a translucent liquid that shimmered in the light, its surface rippling with colors that seemed to shift and change. As he looked at it, Ethan took a deep breath and reached out slowly, his fingers brushing the edge of the bowl as he hesitated for a moment, unsure if this was part of the ritual or a mistake. The moment his fingers touched the surface of the liquid, he felt a jolt of energy surge through his hand. It was like nothing he had ever experienced before, an electric pulse that spread up his arm and made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He looked at Jera, who remained silent, her gaze intense and unwavering. She nodded slightly, urging him to continue, feeling the weight of her gaze. Ethan lifted the bowl to his lips and took a sip. The liquid was unlike anything he had ever tasted. It was both sweet and bitter, at once, the flavors shifting with every passing second. And as he drank, he felt a strange sensation begin to spread through his body. It wasn't just the taste that affected him. It was something deeper, something that seemed to reach into his mind and stir up memories he had long forgotten. Suddenly, his vision blurred, and the room around him seemed to shift, as though the walls were bending and warping. His heart raced, and he gripped the edge of the table as he tried to steady himself. But it was no use. The sensation was overwhelming. He could hear voices now, voices that weren't his own, whispers from distant memories that seemed to call to him from the depths of his mind. They were fragmented, at first barely audible. But as the minutes passed, they grew louder, clearer, more insistent. Ethan's breath came in short gasps as he struggled to make sense of what was happening. Then he heard Jera's voice cutting through the chaos in his mind, her words clear and sharp, as if she was standing right beside him despite the distance between them. "Do you understand now, human? This is what we share through the act of dining. We are not just consuming food, we are consuming each other's histories, each other's souls." Her voice was firm yet gentle, and the intensity of it cut through the haze of his thoughts. Ethan felt a sudden shift in his perception, as though a veil had been lifted, and for the first time he saw what Jera had meant. The memories flooding into him were not just his own, they were pieces of Jera's life, her struggles, her victories, her pain, and her triumphs. He could feel the weight of centuries of history pressing against him, and he gasped as the emotions and experiences of her people flowed through him. He could sense the loss they had endured, the wars they had fought, the bonds they had forged and broken, the love and the hatred that had shaped their world. He had never felt anything like it. The depth of their culture, the complexity of their existence was overwhelming. And he realized in that moment that he had made a grave mistake in underestimating them, in assuming he could ever truly understand what they had gone through, what they had lost, and what they were still fighting for. Jera watched him intently as the emotions surged through him, and she seemed to wait patiently for him to process it all, her eyes never leaving his. She knew that this ritual was not something that could be rushed. It was something that had to be felt, experienced, lived. And only then could he truly understand what it meant to be Jeren. When the rush of sensations finally began to subside, Ethan found himself gasping for breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt disoriented, but strangely more connected to her than he had ever felt before. Jera remained silent for a moment, allowing him to recover before she spoke again, her voice soft, but filled with quiet strength. "You have begun to understand, but there is much more to learn, Ambassador Walker." Ethan could hardly catch his breath as the world around him began to slowly come back into focus. His senses were heightened, everything felt more vivid, more real than it had before. The room, the table, the air itself seemed charged with an energy that he couldn't fully explain. His mind was still reeling from the flood of memories and emotions that had surged through him. But as he looked at Jera, he could no longer see her as just an alien diplomat. She was something far more complex, far more intricate than that. She was a reflection of everything her people had been through and everything they hoped to become. He took another deep breath, trying to steady himself and regain some semblance of control, but the weight of what he had just experienced lingered in his mind. The memories weren't just his anymore, they were shared, they were hers too. and he could feel the fragments of them swirling in the back of his mind, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. Jera didn't speak immediately. She let him breathe and process what he had just gone through. She simply watched him, her expression unreadable, yet somehow reassuring. The silence between them was thick, but not uncomfortable. It felt as though both of them were waiting for something, neither one willing to make the first move until Ethan felt he could fully understand what was happening to him. Finally he spoke, his voice hoarse, as he asked the question that had been burning in the back of his mind since the moment the memories had flooded into him. What was that? What did I just experience? He paused for a moment, his chest still tight with the intensity of what had just occurred. That wasn't just food, was it? Jera's gaze softened just a fraction as she tilted her head slightly, the faintest of smiles tugging at the corners of her lips. No, it was not just food, she said, her voice low and steady. That was the first step in understanding what it means to share a bond with another being. When we Serens invite someone to dine with us, it is not simply a gesture of hospitality. It is a union of minds, a sharing of experiences, a transfer of history that flows between us like a river. It is a way for us to connect with those we choose to trust and those who wish to understand us. Ethan was still struggling to fully grasp what she was saying. The implications of what he had just experienced were overwhelming, but he pressed on, determined to make sense of it all. But how can you just give someone your memories like that? His voice shook slightly as he continued. How can you trust someone you barely know with everything you've been through, your people's history, your pain, your joys, your losses? How can I be sure that I haven't just made a mistake? By agreeing to this, his chest tightened as the reality of the situation hit him harder than before. He had shared his most intimate thoughts and fears with her, and she had done the same, and now they were bound by something he couldn't fully comprehend. Jera's eyes softened with something that might have been empathy or understanding. It was difficult to say, but there was no judgment in her gaze, only the quiet strength that had been present from the beginning. It is not about trust alone, she said, her voice calm but firm. It is about the willingness to face the truth of another being's existence, even if that truth is painful or difficult to bear. When we share our histories, we are not simply giving something away, we are offering a part of ourselves that allows the other to see us as we truly are. It is a gift and a challenge to both parties because it forces us to confront our own vulnerabilities, our own fears, and our own desires. Ethan absorbed her words, slowly trying to piece them together, his mind still reeling from the weight of what he had just experienced. But something in what she said resonated with him. A small part of him began to understand what Jera was offering him was not a test to pass or fail. It was an invitation to understand something far deeper than surface-level diplomacy. It was an invitation to truly see her people for who they were and to allow them to see him in return. Ethan sat there staring at Jera, his mind slowly beginning to shift into a new understanding of what this dinner meant, what this entire experience would mean, not just for him, but for humanity. He had walked into this alien world thinking he could simply follow the script of diplomacy and negotiation. But now it was clear that he was being asked to give up something far more profound, something that went beyond just his role as an ambassador. He was being asked to confront the very nature of connection itself, and the weight of that realization was almost too much to bear. Jera seemed to sense the turmoil within him. She sat quietly waiting for him to process everything before she spoke again, her eyes never leaving his, her calm presence, offering a sense of steady reassurance, even as his mind reeled at the implications of everything that had happened so far. The truth you feel right now is only the beginning. Jera said, her voice a soothing melody against the backdrop of his racing thoughts. What we share here tonight will create something new between us, something that is both fragile and enduring. But it will not be easy. There are no simple answers, no clear boundaries, only the unknown stretching before us, waiting to be explored. Ethan nodded slowly, trying to absorb her words and make sense of the whirlwind of thoughts swirling in his mind. He had agreed to come to this dinner to face whatever came next. But now that he was here, it felt as though he was walking a tightrope over a chasm, with no way of knowing where the fall would take him, or whether he would even survive it. He had come here to make peace, to build a future where humanity could find common ground with the alien races of the galaxy, But now that the veil between their cultures had been pulled back so forcefully, he realized that peace was not just a matter of agreements and compromise. It was a matter of shared experiences of learning to understand one another at the deepest level of their beings. And that kind of understanding could only be built through trust and vulnerability, both of which felt terrifying in this moment. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Ethan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, as he looked down at the strange glowing dishes between them. "I didn't realize how deep this would go, how much of ourselves we have to offer just to sit down and share a meal with someone. I didn't know it would be this overwhelming." Jera remained silent for a moment, as though considering his words before she spoke again, her tone gentle yet firm. "You are not alone in feeling this way, Ambassador Walker," she said. "We Zerans have walked this path for millennia. We have faced the weight of our history and the challenges of forging connections with those who are not like us. We have learned that only by facing our deepest fears and accepting the truth of one another can we hope to move forward together. It is not easy, but it is the only way." Her words were like a balm to his anxious thoughts. They didn't completely erase the fear that lingered in the back of his mind, but they offered a sense of clarity, a sense that he was not alone in this struggle, that even the Zerans, the ancient race whose power and wisdom seemed endless, had faced the same doubts, the same uncertainties in their journey toward understanding others. Ethan took another deep breath and looked back at Jera, his resolve slowly hardening despite the lingering unease that still churned within him. There was no going back now, no way to undo what had already been done. He had stepped into a realm of complexity and depth that went far beyond anything he had ever known. But in doing so, he had also opened the door to something far more important than anything he could have imagined. He had opened the door to the possibility of true connection. "I understand now," he said slowly, his voice stronger than before. "I didn't come here just to represent humanity. I came here to learn, to grow, to find the threads that connect us all, even if it means facing the things I don't understand and don't want to face." Jera's eyes softened just slightly as she nodded in acknowledgement, her lips curving into a faint smile that seemed to hold a mix of approval and quiet pride. "You have taken the first step, Ambassador Walker," she said softly. "You have acknowledged the truth, and that is where everything begins." The tension in the room seemed to ease just a little as the moment stretched out between them, a brief pause in which the world outside seemed to disappear, leaving just the two of them sharing this fragile, precious space of understanding. The food between them lay forgotten for the moment, their shared bond growing stronger with each passing second. But even as the silence deepened, Ethan could feel the next stage of the ritual coming, the part that would push him even further into the unknown, the part that would test him in ways he couldn't yet foresee. Jera slowly stood and gestured for him to do the same. "We move forward now, Ambassador Walker," she said, as she led him toward the next part of the ritual. "Are you ready?" Ethan stood hesitantly, his legs a little shaky as he rose from his seat, the weight of what was unfolding pressing heavily on his chest. Jera had already begun, moving toward the other side of the room, her steps fluid and graceful, as though the very space around her bent to her. Ethan followed her instinctively, as if drawn by an invisible force. The atmosphere around them seemed to thrum with an energy he couldn't quite explain. But it was undeniable. Something was happening, something profound and irrevocable, and he wasn't sure he was ready to face it. Jera stopped in front of a large circular stone platform that had been set in the center of the room. It was unlike anything Ethan had seen before. Its surface was smooth and gleaming with a subtle iridescence, as if the stone itself was alive beneath the soft glow of the room. The edges of the platform were etched with intricate symbols and patterns that seemed to shift and change. When he looked at them too long, they were hypnotic in their complexity, like the language he couldn't read but instinctively understood. "This is the next part of the ritual, Ambassador Walker," Jera said, without turning to look at him, her voice soft, but carrying an unmistakable weight. "The platform before you is a conduit for the exchange that will occur. It will allow us to share not just memories, but the very essence of our beings, our thoughts, our emotions, our intentions, everything that shapes us. It is through this exchange that we begin to truly understand each other and to build something that will endure." Ethan's heart raced as he stepped forward, his feet unsteady. As he moved closer to the platform, it felt like stepping into a strange dream, a dream where nothing was certain, and everything felt as though it were on the brink of shifting forever. He stood at the edge of the platform and looked at Jera. She had already positioned herself on the opposite side of it, her eyes fixed on him, her expression calm. But there was something deeper there, something that hinted at the gravity of what was about to unfold. "Is this safe?" Ethan asked, his voice strained with uncertainty. The words tasted strange on his tongue, as though he was speaking outside of himself. "I mean, I know we've already shared memories, but this feels different." Jera's gaze softened, but her answer was firm. "This is a final test, Ambassador Walker," she said. "This is a point where we let go of our fear and trust in the process. The food we shared earlier was only the beginning. This is where we become vulnerable. This is where we truly allow each other in and see each other as we are." Ethan swallowed, his mouth dry, as he stared at the platform beneath his feet. It seemed to shimmer with an almost inviting warmth, but he felt a deep hesitation, something within him screaming to hold back, to not take that final step, yet everything in him told him that this was the only way forward, the only way to move past the barrier that separated them as alien species, to truly understand what lay at the heart of Jera's people, and of his own. He had no choice but to step into the unknown. He looked at Jera and nodded his head. Once in silent agreement, she smiled faintly and motioned for him to step forward. Without further hesitation, Ethan placed his foot onto the platform and immediately felt a strange hum pass through his body. It started in his feet and spread slowly up his legs like a vibration that resonated with every cell in his body. He looked up at Jera and saw the same sensation reflected in her expression. Her eyes closed slightly, as if she were bracing herself for something. And then the hum intensified, and the world around him began to shift. He felt a sudden rush of sensation flood his mind and body. It was as though every moment of his life, every memory, every experience he had ever had was suddenly laid bare for him to see in full detail, and just as quickly as it had come, it was gone, replaced by the rush of sensations from Jera's life, from her earliest memories of her people's ancient past, to the struggles of her childhood, to the battles she had fought and the sacrifices she had made to become who she was now. It was overwhelming, it was raw, it was her every joy and sorrow, every triumph and loss, everything that made her who she was. Ethan gasped as the flood of emotions crashed over him. They were intense, they were alien, but they were also deeply human in their own way. He could feel the weight of Jera's history pressing against him, and for a moment it felt as though he were drowning in it, but then just as quickly the sensations faded, and he was left standing there on the platform, his breath coming in short gasps as he tried to process what had just happened. Jera opened her eyes and looked at him, her expression unreadable, but there was a faint glimmer of something in her gaze, something that might have been understanding, or perhaps something else entirely. "It is done," she said, her voice soft and steady. "You have experienced what it means to truly share with another being. You have seen what I carry, and I have seen what you carry. This is the bond we now share, the bond that will allow us to move forward together." Ethan swallowed hard as he stepped back from the platform, his head spinning from the flood of sensations and emotions that had coursed through him. But even in the aftermath of it, he couldn't deny that something had changed between them, something had shifted, and the weight of it settled deep in his chest. He looked at Jera and nodded slowly, feeling the enormity of what had just transpired. "I understand now," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "I understand the depth of your people's history and the strength it takes to carry it forward, and I will carry that with me always." Ethan took a deep breath as he stood there on the platform, his body still trembling from the intensity of what he had just experienced. It felt like the world had expanded and contracted around him in a single moment. He had shared something with Jera that transcended language and culture, a shared understanding that went beyond anything he had ever thought possible. The weight of it lingered in his chest, and his mind was still struggling to process everything, but one thing was clear: he could never go back to the way things were before. Jera watched him silently, her gaze calm but intense. She had witnessed his struggle, and now she waited for him to find his bearings, to find the strength to speak again. Ethan felt the pressure of her attention, and it made him feel more vulnerable than he had ever felt before. But there was no turning back now, no retreat from the path they had started down together. He had committed himself to this journey, and now he had to see it through. "Finally, After what seemed like an eternity, Ethan spoke, his voice rough but steady. "Jera, I don't know how to describe what just happened." He paused as though searching for the right words to convey the depths of what he had felt. "I've never experienced anything like that in my life. It was like you handed me a piece of your soul, and I gave you a piece of mine, and now we're bound by something that goes beyond the physical, beyond our words. It's something deeper, something I can't fully grasp, but I know it's there." Jera nodded slowly, as though acknowledging the truth in his words. "That is the nature of the ritual," she said softly. "We have shared what is most intimate within us, and in doing so we have created a connection that is stronger than any treaty or agreement could ever be. What we have now is not just a bond of diplomacy, it is a bond of understanding, a shared history that will transcend time." Ethan felt the weight of her words, and it both humbled and overwhelmed him. He had come here to negotiate, to represent humanity in a galaxy of complex cultures and civilizations. But what he had found instead was a deeper kind of truth, a truth that transcended borders and species. And now he understood that peace wasn't just about agreeing on terms, it was about connecting on the most fundamental level, seeing each other's vulnerabilities and embracing them. "I didn't realize how much this would change me," Ethan admitted, his voice quieter now as he looked at her. "I thought I could keep my distance, keep my emotions in check, but after this, after sharing that with you, I don't know if I can ever look at things the same way again." Jera's gaze softened as she studied him, her eyes no longer filled with the intensity they had carried earlier, but with a quiet respect that Ethan could feel deep in his bones. "You do not need to fear change, Ambassador Walker," she said, her voice warm yet steady. "Change is the only constant we can count on in this universe. It is what drives growth and evolution. It is what has allowed our people to survive for so long, and it is what will allow us to move forward together with humanity." Ethan met her gaze, his mind swirling with everything he had experienced, but now a sense of clarity was slowly beginning to emerge from the chaos. He had walked into this room unsure of what he was stepping into, and now he stood here bound to Jera and her people in a way that went far beyond diplomacy. It wasn't just a professional relationship, it was personal. It was something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He could feel the gravity of the moment pressing against him, but instead of being crushed by it, he found a strange sense of peace within himself. It was as though the weight of the universe had shifted just slightly, and now he could see the connections between all things, the threads that wove them together, stretching across the stars and into the hearts of those who shared this vast cosmos. "I'm ready to move forward," Ethan said, his voice steady, now stronger than it had been before. "I'm ready to build that bridge between our worlds and carry forward the understanding we've shared tonight." Jera's eyes shone with something close to pride, and she stepped closer to him, her presence surrounding him like a quiet storm. "You have taken the first step, Ambassador Walker," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But the true journey begins now, and together we will face the challenges ahead, side by side, as partners and as equals." Ethan nodded as he took a step forward, his heart steady, his mind clear for the first time in a long while. He had entered this ritual unsure of what to expect, and now he felt as though he had been given a glimpse of something greater, something that was worth fighting for, worth building toward. He was no longer just a diplomat in a foreign world. He was a part of something larger than himself, something that transcended boundaries and divisions. And in that moment, he realized that this connection, this bond with Jera and her people, was the key to a future he had never before imagined. The room around them seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for them to make the next move, but Ethan knew that whatever came next, he was ready, because he had crossed a threshold, and there was no going back. Ethan stood there for a moment longer, the weight of Jera's words still hanging in the air between them. Everything felt different now. The room was no longer just a diplomatic meeting space. It was a place of transformation, a place where everything he had thought he knew about communication and connection had been turned on its head. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt like a shared understanding was settling into the space, a recognition that something had shifted irrevocably both in him and in their relationship. Jera's gaze never wavered as she studied him, her expression serene, but Ethan could see the faintest flicker of something deeper in her eyes, a recognition of the shared experience they had just gone through, an acknowledgement of the change that had just occurred between them. And with that realization came the understanding that what had been shared between them was not just a one-way exchange, it was a partnership forged in the depths of trust and vulnerability, a partnership that would need to be nurtured and protected as they moved forward. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of quiet contemplation, Jera spoke, her voice soft yet filled with a quiet certainty. Now that we have shared this moment together, Ambassador Walker, now that you understand the depth of what we have given each other, it is time for the next step. Her words were calm, but there was an undeniable gravity to them. Ethan felt his heart pick up pace again as he braced himself for whatever came next. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew that the ritual wasn't over yet, and that whatever came next would test him, just as the previous moments had. He nodded slowly, trying to steady his breathing. He could feel the pulse of the room around him, the subtle hum that had started when he stepped onto the platform still reverberating in the air, like an echo of something ancient, something powerful. "What's the next step?" he asked, his voice steady, but his mind racing. He knew Jera had more to show him, more to share, and despite the fear that lingered in the back of his mind, he knew he couldn't back away from this now, not when he had come this far. Jera didn't immediately respond. She simply motioned for him to follow her and turned toward the far side of the room where a large door stood waiting. It was unlike any door he had seen before. Its surface was carved with symbols and patterns that shifted as though they were alive. The door seemed to pulse with an energy that made his skin tingle with anticipation. He had no idea what lay beyond it, but he could feel the weight of it pressing on him, the understanding that whatever was behind that door would be the final piece of their shared experience. He followed her wordlessly across the room, his steps hesitant but determined. He could feel his heartbeat in his chest like a drumbeat urging him forward. The anticipation was palpable, and he knew that what lay beyond the door would change everything. When they reached the door, Jera turned to face him once more, her eyes filled with something unspoken, an understanding that passed between them in a quiet, almost imperceptible exchange. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence alone conveyed everything he needed to know. "Beyond this door lies the final part of the ritual," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is not something we take lightly. It is a test of what we have shared, and a test of what we are willing to sacrifice for the sake of the bond we have forged together. It will challenge you in ways you cannot yet imagine. But if you are willing to face it, if you are willing to take the final step with me, you will emerge from it changed and more united than you could have ever hoped." Ethan looked at her, his mind racing with 100 different thoughts, 100 different fears. But deep down he knew that there was no turning back from this journey, no way to undo what they had already shared, no way to unsee what he had seen, and more than that, there was no way he could walk away from the promise of something greater, something that reached beyond his understanding, something that could change the course of history. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady this time, more certain than he had felt before. His hand reached out to touch the surface of the door. It hummed beneath his fingers, and for a moment he could feel the weight of every decision that had brought him here, every step that had led him to this point. He could feel the connection between him and Jera humming in the air. Between them, the bond they had forged was real, it was undeniable, and in that moment he knew with absolute certainty that this was not just about diplomacy, this was about something far greater. Jera nodded once and placed her hand on the door as well, her touch gentle but firm. She met his gaze one last time before she spoke. "Then let us begin the final part of this journey, Ambassador Walker," she said, her voice filled with quiet strength, and without another word she pushed the door open. Beyond it was a darkness deeper than any Ethan had ever seen, but as the door swung wide, he felt a pull, something beckoning him forward, something that whispered of what lay ahead, a challenge not just for him, but for the future of humanity and the Zeran people, a challenge that would test their bond and their resolve in ways neither of them could yet fathom. And with that they stepped into the unknown together. The darkness enveloped them as they crossed the threshold of the door. It was a deep and impenetrable blackness that seemed to stretch out infinitely in every direction. Ethan could feel his breath catch in his chest as he stepped forward, his every sense alert to the unfamiliar surroundings. But there was no fear, no hesitation, not anymore. He had crossed every boundary that had once seemed insurmountable, and now he was here, standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. Beside him, Jera moved with the same quiet confidence she had shown throughout their journey. Her presence was a steady anchor in the overwhelming darkness. She was his guide now, and he trusted her implicitly. "Do not fear the darkness," Jera's voice cut through the stillness, soft, but carrying an undeniable power. "It is not an absence, but a presence. It holds the potential for everything that has yet to be discovered." Ethan nodded. Though he couldn't see her face in the dark, he could sense the depth of her words. They resonated within him, echoing through his mind and soul. This place was not empty, it was full. It was a canvas waiting for something to be painted upon it, a challenge waiting to be faced. And as he walked beside Jera, he understood that this was where the true test would happen. They walked in silence for what seemed like hours, the air around them thick with the weight of their shared understanding. But there was no sense of time here, no sense of anything but the steady pulse of their footsteps, the rhythm of their journey together. The deeper they moved into the darkness, the more Ethan could feel a strange energy swirling around them. It wasn't oppressive, but it was undeniably powerful. It was as though the space itself was alive, pulsing with anticipation. And then ahead of them, the darkness began to shift. It rippled, as if it were water disturbed by a single drop. Something began to take form out of the void, and Ethan's breath hitched as he saw the shape emerge from the shadows. It was vast and towering, unlike anything he had ever seen before, a creature of pure energy, its form shifting and changing with every moment, a kaleidoscope of light and darkness. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a manifestation of the very forces they were about to face. The creature's presence was overwhelming. It felt like it had always been here, existing in the space between moments, waiting for them to arrive, waiting for this moment when their journey would reach its final stage. Jera stepped forward, her gaze unwavering as she addressed the creature, her voice calm yet filled with authority. "We have come as one," she said simply. "We have shared our stories, our lives, our deepest selves, and we are ready to face what lies ahead." The creature shifted again, its form warping and twisting as it seemed to regard them both. The air around them vibrated with an energy that was almost tangible. Ethan could feel it hum through his skin and into his bones, his heart racing as he tried to make sense of what was happening. For a long moment, the creature remained silent, its form shifting and undulating like smoke in a windless room. But then it spoke, its voice not a sound, but a sensation, a feeling that washed over Ethan and Jera alike. "Your bond is true," it said, the words echoing in the very fabric of his mind. "You have faced the darkness within yourselves and shared what no one else has ever seen. You have bridged the gap between your worlds, and now you stand before me not as strangers but as equals." Ethan's heart thundered in his chest as the creature's presence seemed to grow even more intense, its words resonating within him in ways he couldn't describe. "You have passed the trial," the creature continued. "You have proven yourselves worthy of the next step, the next phase of your journey together. But to move forward, you must be willing to leave behind the comfort of what you know and embrace the unknown without reservation." Jera turned to Ethan, her eyes meeting his in the darkness, her expression unreadable. But there was no fear, there only resolve. She nodded once and then looked back at the creature. "We are ready," she said firmly. "We have already let go of what we thought we knew. We have crossed the threshold into the unknown, and we will walk through it together." The creature's form rippled again, and then it began to dissolve into the air, as though it had never existed at all. The darkness around them began to lighten just slightly, and Ethan could feel the shift, the subtle change in the atmosphere. The tension that had held the space so tightly was slowly releasing, as if the creature's challenge had been passed. Jera turned to face him and smiled for the first time since they had entered the darkness, the expression soft and genuine. "You have done it," she said, her voice quiet but filled with pride. "You have faced the unknown and come out the other side. You have proven that humanity is capable of more than you realize, that you are not just capable of surviving this galaxy, you are capable of shaping it alongside others." Ethan stood there for a moment, taking in her words and the enormity of what had just happened. He had come here to represent humanity, but now he understood that his role in this universe was much more than that. He wasn't just an ambassador, he was a part of something far greater, something that reached beyond the stars, something that bound him to Jera and her people in a way that could never be undone. "We've done it," Ethan said finally, his voice full of wonder and certainty together. And with that, the darkness finally lifted, leaving them standing on the threshold of a new beginning, a future they would face side by side as equals, with nothing but the vast unknown ahead of them, waiting to be shaped by their shared bond.